Hey guys, it's April from Getting Hygge With It. Today I want to do my March wrap-up, and Libby apparently wants to do it with me. Libby would like to say hello to and also do her March wrap-ups with me, don't you? You do. Oh God. She turned 9 at the end of March. So here are the books that I read in March. March was a good month for me. I read 8 books, so I feel super accomplished. And I want to dive right into what I read. The first book I read in the month of March was Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. Now, this was a fun read. I gave it 4 stars. It's a fun thriller. It's not too morbid or bloody at all. Like, if you are new to thrillers, you're a bit of a scaredy cat, this is a great one to start with. It's like the Real Housewives of any city, Atlanta, New York, or whatever they are. It's like the Real Housewives meets Pretty Little Liars together. That's kind of how I would explain it. It follows the drama-filled lives of these moms in Australia. It was really, really fun. Reese Witherspoon recently turned it into a miniseries on HBO, and I've been loving the miniseries so much. Honestly, I almost like the miniseries more than the book. That never happens. The second book that I read in March was The Flood by Michael McDowell. I didn't know about this author until Kitty over at Chapter Stacks mentioned him. This was supposed to be a horror novel, but it turned out to be more of like a family saga that's got magical realism interwoven into it. And it actually reminded me a lot of Isabel Alon's The House of Spirits. So it turned out to be a whole different thing. I was expecting to be scared out of my mind, and I wasn't at all. But I still do want to follow the rest of the story. So this book, The Flood, is the first in a series. It's called the Blackwater series, I believe. It starts out with 2 men in a rowboat. Their town has flooded, and so they're kind of going through the town to see what they can see what the damage is, and they happen upon this building. There's a woman in this building, and she's sitting on the edge of a bed, and she turns around and she's like, "Oh, I've been waiting for you." And they're like, "How did you survive? Like, this has been like, I think it was like 4 days or something where the floods have come and they haven't come by yet." And she's like, "Oh yeah, I've been waiting for you." And she gets into the boat with them and goes back to like dry land with them, and she starts having relationships with people in the town. So it started out kind of very eerily to me, and it was definitely an eerie book. It's unsettling, it's very strange, but definitely more magical realism than horror in my mind. The third book that I read in March was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and now I gave this a 5 star. Harry Potter is just like a big hug to me, and I read this on audiobook, and the narrator I think is Jim Dale, and he's just a wonderful narrator. He like brings all of these characters to life, and if you haven't listened to Harry Potter on audiobook, I highly recommend that you do. It's like an enormous, wonderful, warm hug. The fourth book I read was on my spring TBR, and it was a big old flop for me. This was The Spider and the Fly by Claudia Rowe. I gave this 2 stars. This follows a reporter who meets with a serial killer. She tries to have a relationship with a serial killer, and he wants to know more about her. He's intrusive in her life. Like, he won't say anything about his kills, essentially, unless she gives a little bit of information about her. So it felt very Silence of the Lambs when you read the back cover. And then you start to read it. And I found this way too self-reflective. This turned out to be just as much about Claudia Rowe herself as it was about this serial killer. I did find the relationship between her and the killer to be kind of interesting. It was a very odd relationship, and she was always trying to connect with him and understand him. And I think you couldn't help but try to do that when you're basing a lot of your career around someone, and you also want to get to the bottom of like what happened to this man to do this. Like, did something happen to him? Was he just incredibly mentally ill? Like, what exactly happened? But what I didn't like about it was that it turned out to be way too self-reflective in ways that were totally unrealistic. This man lived with his parents in a very run-down house. Like, it had not been cleaned in years. There were bugs everywhere in this home. It was like very disgusting, totally unlivable. And when he was living with his parents, he would have prostitutes at his home, kill them, and then put them in the attic. And his mother said that she, didn't know that this had happened. She didn't know that her son had killed people. She didn't know that there were bodies in the attic. And what I found very angering for me about Claudia Rowe was that she compared her not wanting to face the truth about things like her relationship going wrong, like her romantic relationship with her boyfriend not going well and falling apart and not wanting to, really come to terms with it and see it for what it was. She compared that to the mother not seeing that there were bodies in her attic. You cannot compare some things. You just can't. That is a prime example of what you can't. And this whole book was riddled with that. It almost made me angry. If you want to talk about your life, if you want to explain the things that have gone on in your life and you want to be reflective about your life, please do that book separately. I don't know how many people are going to read it, but do that book and then do this book justice. You can say how this man and this reporting story affected you. You can talk about the relationship that you had with him and how that affected you. But I just think it's irresponsible to try to draw lines between things that just don't connect. I was really disappointed with her. I almost want to give this a 1 star now because I'm so mad at her. Don't read it. So the next book that I read in March was The Boston Girl by Anita Diamant. I could be pronouncing that name wrong. I think I really am. But she wrote The Red Tent, which got like all sorts of credit and acclaim, and I've never read that. I now want to read that after reading this book. I gave this book 5 stars. It was so good. This was a wonderful growing up story. Essentially, how it starts is her granddaughter wants to interview her grandmother about her grandmother's life. And she says, of course, like, come and sit down. I'll tell you the story of my life. And she begins, and it's this lovely growing up story about her childhood in Boston as a Jewish girl, all of the friendships that she made as a teenage girl, the love of her life coming into her life. It was just a beautiful, beautiful book. I wish that I could read it all over again. Now, I read this on audiobook, and the audiobook was great. I highly recommend reading it that way, but I think like paperback would also be really great. The next book that I read was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I gave this 4 stars. I really loved this book. It follows a group of people. Some of them are humans, some of them are not. And it is a space kind of drama and very much a character study of all of these people on this spaceship. Their job is essentially to punch holes in the universe to make shortcuts for spaceships to get from one part of the universe to another, just to cut down on time. And I really loved all of these characters. You really connect with a lot of these characters. Some of them you hate very few you hate. Most of them you're just rooting for all the way. I also thought the world building was wonderful. I cannot wait to read A Closed and Comet Orbit, which is the next book in the series. I think it's already out, so I might actually treat myself on my birthday in May and just go and get it, because I just need more of this world. It was lovely. The next book that I read was a nonfiction. It's called Yes, You Can Get Pregnant by Amy Raupp. I gave this 4 stars. So my husband and I have been trying to conceive for a year and a half now. Nothing. And it's been very heartbreaking and frustrating, and it really tests your marriage, and it's also made our marriage stronger. I might do an actual whole other video about books that I would recommend for fertility. I'm now, after reading this book, I'm not using the word infertility anymore, because you can really get stuck in a rut and you can really start hating your body or hating your husband's body, or depending on what the issues are about not being able to conceive in the amount of time that you'd want. So this book really made me reevaluate my relationship with my body. I felt very much frustrated with my body for a really long time. So I'm starting to think a little more loving thoughts to my body after reading this. I did think some of it was like a little too extreme. I'm a vegetarian, and there's a lot of information in this book about like eat meat, drink bone broth, meat. And I'm not going to do that. I will go and get B12, vitamin B12, because I realize that there are vitamins that I'm missing. But yeah, there are certain lines that I don't think I'm comfortable with crossing for myself. Even to get pregnant, I think I have certain lines. That might change, but right now I have certain lines. So I wish that it was a little bit more inclusive of alternate diets, but I'm really grateful that I read it. There's a lot of information in here about visualization, exercises that you can do, a lot of information about nutrition and that kind of thing. So I do recommend it to someone who is going through some fertility stuff, or is thinking about getting pregnant. It takes your body some time to absorb certain nutrients and stuff to get your eggs as healthy as possible. So I would recommend it, definitely. The last book that I read in March was Tulip Fever. Now this is, I think, going to become a movie. I don't know if they have the release date yet, but it's coming up. It's going to be a movie, and I cannot wait. This follows a young girl in Holland, I believe, during the Tulip Fever phase. She has married a much older man, and he's totally in love with her. And she's living with him, married to him, sleeping with him, but kind of just putting up with him. And then the husband says, I think it's time for us to get our portraits done. So he hires this young man to come and start doing their portraits, and they fall in love. And it also follows the storyline of her maid and her relationship with her maid, who she starts to kind of treat like a sister, because she doesn't have a lot of people around that are her age, and they really connect. So I don't want to give away too much about this book, but it follows an unplanned pregnancy and the biggest cover-up. This book made me feel sick to my stomach a lot of the time, because I just couldn't believe the cover-up and going through this kind of cover-up and tricking people, and it felt gross to me. I had a really hard time at certain points reading it. I think it's pretty darn good writing when you can make someone feel incredibly uncomfortable and they're, cozied up in their own bed. But those were all of the books that I read in March. I'm so glad. I feel like this was a really good reading month. I had a lot of 4 stars in there, maybe just 1 or 2 5 stars, but yeah, it was a good month. Let me know what your favorite book that you read in March was. I would love to know, and I will see you next time. Bye!